everyone. Today I wanted to talk about the new docuseries on Netflix called Night Stalker: The Hunt for a Serial Killer. So this is definitely a different docuseries than most, I think, serial killer documentaries. And so I just wanted to touch a little bit on what happens in the episodes, but I'm not going to, give anything away. It's still definitely worth watching. I'm going to talk about why it's different than most docuseries, what I enjoyed about it, and then just a few comments on the entire thing. So if you don't know who the Night Stalker is, he was a serial killer in the 80s by the name of Richard Ramirez, and he had quite a interesting year of crime sprees. He was a prolific serial killer, and this documents the way that he was captured. So I think that's an interesting point in itself. I think most documentaries, when they're about serial killers, their face is plastered over the entire thing, and from the very beginning you get like interviews with them and pictures of them and this and that, and then you kind of unravel the story behind them throughout. This one is very different. It's made up of 4 episodes, and you don't even see Ramirez's face until the 4th episode. And so it's kind of like you're slowly being revealed the information that the detectives working the case were revealed. That, I think, is an interesting approach to a docuseries about a serial killer, kind of letting the audience feel the anticipation that people in the town were feeling. So let's just kind of jump into it. The first episode, first of all, the introduction is awesome. I really like the way it was filmed. It's a very well done, well put together docuseries. They have a lot of clips from the 80s, a lot of newscasters clips, a lot of interviews with people, so just a lot of work, you could tell, went into the docuseries. So the very first episode, we get information on the cops, detectives, newscasters, witnesses, survivors. We do get to learn a lot of information about the detectives working the case. We see a lot of evidence photos following the murders, and this was something that Netflix actually got a lot of heat for. People were complaining, but again, I think if you watch pretty much any docuseries or any show like the first 48, you do get shown a lot of horrific photos, so I'm not sure what was different about this one that people were complaining about, but yeah, they did horrible things. You're going to see horrible things. That being said, if you don't want to see crime scene photos, absolutely do not watch this. They're very disturbing. We hear information about how he cut out eyes and assaulted children and just really horrific crimes. So you're kind of thrown into the middle of this just as the detectives were, and you really get to hear a lot of just horrible accounts from people that were victims and family members and things like that, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So at the end of the first episode, we have 8 murders, and we are now figuring out that they are connected. Now, I will say something that I think worked against the cops in this particular case was the fact that he would assault 8-year-old boys and assault 80-year-old women. Most serial killers, from my understanding, do fit some sort of type where they have like a type of person that they do specific things to. He didn't really have an MO like that, and I think that is what made it very challenging for the cops to find him. However, he was found pretty quickly after these strains of murders. I think he went on kind of like this rampage in 84, and he was caught in 85, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But still, like a year of terrorizing an entire town and state. So I think that was what was challenging for the cops, to see a connection between all of these cases, because they were so vastly different. He would abduct children from their bedrooms and then let them go hours later, or he would break into a house and murder an 80-year-old woman. Like, there was no standard mode of execution, different weapons that he used. Up until this point, I don't think that there were a lot of serial killers that were like this. So I think that the cops had a lot working against them. That being said, though, we'll find some information out about the cops. So in episode 2, they matched all of these crimes from a shoe print. So some of them were shoe prints of blood tracked through the house. Some of them were in the mud outside of little children's bedroom windows, and the cops were actually able to identify that these crimes were all being committed by one person through the shoe prints, which obviously wasn't released to the public, and it was their main way of figuring out if this was the Night Stalker. So in episode 2, after they figured out the shoe print was connected to him, they went back and analyzed other cases and found 2 more murders in connection with the Night Stalker. And this is actually in episode 2 is where we find a pentagram for the first time on the leg of a victim with lipstick. So this is kind of where the devil worshipping aspect, the Satanism, comes into play. So here's an interesting part I think about this documentary in particular is I think that it really shows like the fundamental issues with our police system. Okay, so for example, I live in LA, that's where the crimes were committed. So you have the LAPD, right? But then you'll have Glendale PD, but then you'll have, you know, like a bunch of different jurisdictions of police to work at. So the killer would kill somebody in LA, go to Glendale, for example, kill someone in Glendale. I don't know if anyone actually got killed in Glendale, but I'm just giving you an example. And then 2 different detectives would be working those cases and they wouldn't be sharing information. So I think this really just points out such an issue with the policing system, at least in the 80s. I'm hoping that it's better nowadays, but you know, that's a crazy concept in that they couldn't even figure out that these crimes were related because, you know, 8 different people were working on these different murder cases because they were all in different jurisdictions. So I thought that was interesting, and not to mention kind of the rivalry between police officers because they wanted to, you know, be the one to solve the case. But also in episode 2, we do get a lot of videos and photos of victims and also victims' families. So, you know, it's really heartbreaking to see a woman talk about her grandmother who was murdered in the 80s and what she remembered when she was 14 on that day that her grandma died. We also get an interview from a victim who was 6 and abducted and luckily let go by the Night Stalker, but just mind-blowingly horrific. So I also thought it was interesting that we get to see the chaos that one man caused. We get to see how exhausted the detectives were. We get to see how scared the community was. We get to see the strain on the detectives and their families. We get to see the strain on the families of the victims. We get to see the strain on the victims themselves. It really is a different sort of documentary. I feel like a lot of the times the documentaries are on the killers themselves, but this definitely focused on the people around the killer. And so you definitely got a closer look and a closer feel of what these people were going through in this time. In episode 3, we find that the cops keep missing out on these clues. So because they are not working together and they are all in different jurisdictions, we find that a car that the Night Stalker had stolen should have been fingerprinted, but instead it was left out to the elements and a fingerprint is no longer able to be extracted from the hood of the car. We also find, I'm not going to give too much away because I really do want you guys to be able to watch this and enjoy it, but we find that cops knew he was going to be somewhere and they missed him there. I don't know if we can solely blame the cops on this or if Ramirez just had a horseshoe up his ass. I don't know, but it's crazy how many times this guy got away by this much. We also learn that he's now committing murders in San Francisco, in different towns, and just kind of causing mayhem everywhere. We get more graphic pictures. And in episode 3, we find his name. So now we have the name of the Night Stalker. We just have to figure out who that is. And then also at the end of episode 3, we find that important information about that shoe print was released to the public. And obviously this hindered the detective's case because that was the only thing that was connecting the crimes together. Like, could you imagine if Ramirez had just 2 different pairs of shoes, how different things would have turned out? It's kind of crazy. So the fact that their biggest lead was being revealed to the public, and obviously he's watching the news, he knows what's going on, he's not going to make that same mistake again. So the cops were really upset about that, understandably so. In episode 4, which is the last episode, we get a bit of information on his past. Now I want to focus on this. If you guys do a quick 10-minute Google search of Richard Ramirez, he had a horrific childhood. He also had a lot of concussions as a young child and mental health issues throughout his life. None of this is mentioned, by the way, in the docuseries. It's like a 1-minute, oh yeah, his dad beat him, but it was so much more than that. Truly, this guy suffered a lot, had horrible influence his whole life. Obviously, I'm not condoning his crimes because of that, but it is kind of interesting to think, you know, that whole nature versus nurture argument. Was he born a serial killer or was he a product of his environment? I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think people are inherently evil and that's how they're born? For me, it's harder to believe that. I think that a lot of the times, unfortunately, people like this are a product of how they were raised. Again, not condoning their actions at all. I know people have horrible childhoods and don't grow up to be mass serial killers, but it is just kind of interesting because the guy just really, he never had a chance. Truly, from the day he was born, he never had a chance. So it is interesting to think if he was placed in a home with a loving family, would things have turned out differently? I really don't know. I don't know. What do you guys think? But I was kind of confused as to why they didn't focus on his past. The docuseries really did make him out to be this being of evil, and I think that was done purposefully because that's how people in the community saw him. That's how his victims saw him. That's how the victim's family saw him. That's how the detectives saw him. And that's kind of who we're focusing on in this docuseries. But I think people would be interested to hear what happened to him growing up. I think it would just, I feel like, make a little bit more sense. But with keeping that back a little and only sharing a little bit of information, they really do kind of push this narrative that he is just this being of evil, this Satanist man that just is an evil force. And I don't necessarily know how I feel about that. I don't know. It was just an interesting way of a serial killer being represented in a docuseries. So we get like 1 minute information about his past. We learn about how he gets arrested, how he goes to court, his groupies in jail, which unfortunately is something that a lot of serial killers or people who commit heinous crimes, they do have these groupies that write into them. This even happens in modern day times. It's just really disturbing. And then they find out in episode 4 that he probably has committed a lot of murders because they link him to a murder in San Francisco before kind of his reign of terror in LA started, and the cops were saying that these two crimes were really far apart, but then once he was in LA, he was just murdering a ton of people. So it doesn't really make sense that he would kill someone, wait 6 months, and then go on this crazy rampage. So they're assuming there probably are more victims that probably will never be brought to light, which is just horrible. And then we get the trial, and then we just get told that he died 2 decades into his life on death row from cancer, and that's kind of where the docuseries ends. I will say that throughout the first 3 episodes, you get little snippets of interviews with him, so you actually hear Ramirez speaking. So I thought that was building up to an end where we got to hear a full interview from him, and that just never materialized. So I was a little bit disappointed, but again, the docuseries wasn't about him as a serial killer or him as a person. It was about the people around him and how he was caught. So I do understand that, but I thought that that would have been a really cool ending to have like a full interview of him. But I think the docuseries did a really great job of not glorifying being a serial killer. That being said, I thought it was a pretty well done docuseries. Let me know what you guys think if you have seen it, and if you haven't seen it, will you guys watch it? Pretty sad stuff. I mean, I don't usually talk about serial killers and stuff like that on this channel, but I just watched the docuseries. I had a lot of thoughts about it, and I thought that some of it was really important, like the issues in the police department and things like that. So just had a few comments on it that I'd share my thoughts with you guys. And other than that, I will see you next Tuesday with another horror video, or Friday on my other non-horror channel if you're interested in that. And I will see you next time. Bye guys.